We begin with our first story. He showed up in the alleyway. Let me start you off with a bit of backstory here. I'm female. It was 2011 and I was 18 years old. I was working at a Starbucks. Seeing as I needed some money to help pay for school, this job was helping out. I'd started working there for about a month and everything was going well. I would get the occasional guy talk to me or want my number, but I usually told them I wasn't interested. I was single, but I was more focused on my schoolwork. One evening I'd been working per normal, and this man around 50-ish years old walks into the store. Mind you, it was just myself and two other coworkers. Now, we don't have anything against people just sitting down at the tables doing nothing, but this guy was starting to creep me out. Any time I would look over at him, he'd have his phone pointed over at me, almost as if he was recording me. What was creepy was when I looked at him, he ended up taking a picture because the flash went off. I actually called him out for it, but he told me it was an accident. Hey there, sir. Are you gonna be ordering anything? We're gonna be closing the store in about 30 minutes, so are you gonna do anything? He responded by saying,
You know what? There is something I want. I want to have you.
I wasn't having any of it, and I told him he had to leave, to which he does. Fast forward a week later, and I'd all but forgotten about him. Again, it was closing, and it was the same co-workers with me. We will call them Jonathan and Emma. The last remaining guests had left, and we were in the process of closing the store. As Emma and Jonathan are cleaning up, I decided to head to the back alleyway to throw the trash away. I just wish I wouldn't have gone alone. See, the thing about this alleyway were the lights back here weren't really working well. The only light that would really provide illumination was by the dumpster and next to our door. This meant that if someone was hiding in the dark, they could easily sneak up on you. This wasn't something I was thinking about as I head outside singing some songs that were playing on Emma's iPod. Now, just imagine it. 11 p.m. in a small town in a dark alleyway. I proceed to walk over to the dumpster, and just as I'm about to throw everything away, I hear something fall over. Well, that was weird. Surely Jonathan and Emma were inside the shop. I now look both ways, but I see nothing. Perhaps just a curious cat accidentally knocking something over? Regardless, I turn around, and there he is. Remember that weirdo from last week, the one I mentioned who had showed up to our shop? Well, not only was he standing a few feet away from me, but he also had a sharp object in his hands. From the looks of it, it was a knife. I froze as he now tells me,
Don't you dare say anything or make any noise if you know what's good for you. Come with me and we can talk.
I lost it. I figured this would be it. The night I would disappear and this guy would win. I knew right there and then I had to get back inside the shop, and I'd do the only thing I could think of. I shouted and I run over to the door. He actually almost grabbed me, but I was able to move my arm out of the way at the last second. Well, you bet I slammed that door closed, and I yelled over to Jonathan and Emma to get over here quick. Emma, Jonathan, hurry! It's that guy from last week. He's out there. You can imagine they were confused, but as they heard the loud knocking on the door, they knew this was serious business. Thankfully, this door is heavy and doesn't open easily. Emma calls police while Jonathan races over to the front to double-check the door was locked. Literally like a scene out of a scary movie. You see this guy slowly walk over to the front of the store with the biggest smile you can imagine. Jonathan is stumbling around with the keys and he's trying to lock the front door, but luckily it was closed. This dude now begins to kick at our front door, all the while we're hoping he won't break it down. After a minute or so, he gives up and begins to run as we see two officers' vehicles approach. After a 2-minute chase on foot, they're able to catch up and take him away. Now, as it turned out, he had quite the record. Not that it took that to convince me he was up to no good. So, I just hope I never have to see him again. Our second story. He showed up when I least expected it. This took place in the summer of 2013 when I decided to sell some old games. I was looking to buy a new car, but unfortunately, I had no money. The job I had working at Target was helping, but I really wanted money quicker. Because of this, I ended up opening a Craigslist account. I went ahead and posted things like my Nintendo 64, PlayStation 2, and even my Game Boy Advance. All of them, mind you, were in great condition, something my mom would be proud of, and she always made sure I took care of my belongings. Along with the postings, I put in the description that if people needed to contact me, I could give them my email. One beginner's mistake was I'd put my name and contact information, which I know now was probably the worst thing you could do. So, after a day of the postings going live, I received a message from another user. They were interested in the Nintendo 64. The only thing was they wanted to talk to me over the phone. I didn't really think much of it, so I soon received a call from an unknown number. Hi, are you the gentleman who was interested in buying my Nintendo 64? He hesitates for a few seconds as the conversation starts to go silent. Sorry, but were you able to hear what I said?
Oh, yeah, sorry. I was just thinking about something. How are you?
He seemed a bit awkward and sounded like he was in his mid-40s. After a couple of sentences, I got down to business and I told him about the prices. That should have been it, but he now begins wanting to know my age, where I lived, and other personal information. I was starting to get a bit suspicious about this, but he tells me now...
Sorry, it's just that I have a daughter I want to get this for. I told her about all the old games I used to play, and now she wants a Nintendo 64. I saw the listing you put up, and she's about 11 years old.
Now, mind you, I was 19, but it was still weird he wanted to know so much about me. Eventually, some more awkward talk later, and he says now...
If you include the games, I'll go ahead and take it off your hands for $150. If you want, we can meet up in person and we can do the exchange that way.
Yeah, but wouldn't it just be better if I sent it to you? That'd be faster, right?
No. I have to see you. I looked at your profile. You're quite the beauty there, Rachel.
I froze. That's when I remembered I put my Instagram handle inside the description. He must have looked at my photos. I wasn't sure, but I really started to get a bad feeling about all of this. I told them that I wasn't comfortable meeting in person, and I insisted I could send it over the mail. He wasn't having any of that, and he started saying things how I led him on and how I would be sorry. I had enough. I end the call and I finished by blocking him. On top of that, I went ahead and took the listing down. I honestly thought that was it, but a week later I was working at Target when this man approaches me. By the way, I worked in the electronics section. This guy was around 5'7", maybe 300 pounds, with glasses, long hair in a ponytail, and a beard. Let me just say that the smell on him, it was like rotten cheese. It was bad. Anyways, he looks at my name tag and then he says,
I knew I would find you, Rachel. There's no need to hide from me now. Forget the Nintendo 64. I'd rather have you.
Yep, it was the same person over the phone. I kid you not. This guy had gone out of his way not only to find me, but now he wanted to do who knows what. Luckily, security was walking near me when I ended up calling them over. What happens next was this guy begins yelling at him, telling him I was his niece and how I needed to go with him back to his house. Funny enough, this security guard was friends with my uncle, and he knew he was lying out of his teeth. Mr. Creepy Dude finally seems to have enough and takes a swing at my security guard friend. Here's the only thing. He had no idea that my security guard friend used to be in the Marines. He takes him down and officers are called. You can imagine what happens after that. So, that's the story about how my normal Craigslist listing turned into somebody finding me in real life. It's just sad when you think about it. All I wanted to do was just get some money for my car, but the fact that he actually went on my Instagram and found out where I worked, well, that just tells you a whole lot about certain people out there. Just be careful and don't make the same mistakes I made, because trust me, I know they were pretty bad. Story number 3. The night my dog saved me. I just want to start off by saying I've been listening to scary stories for a couple of years now. Through all the endless nights of listening, I figured I would go ahead and share one of my own stories that happened to me. I apologize for how long this is, but I want to include as many details as possible so you feel like you were there. Stick with me because what I find out after what happened to me on this night is what's truly scary. So, in order for me to begin, I have to take you back to the year of 2007. At that time, I was 16 years old. Seeing as I was someone who enjoyed the outdoors, especially camping, it was no wonder you would find me outside the house. Growing up in Southern California meant I spent many nights camping by the beach. Now, let me explain what I meant by camping at the beach. Obviously, you have the shoreline where the water meets the sand. Then, you have a campground that's located on top of said cliffside. This is where you could find a campground where families would go to every summer. As for the shoreline itself, it was about a mile in length, with staircases that led you to the said campground. Now, since the city was working on some new buildings, there was part of the beach that was closed off for construction. This meant that part of the campground was closed to the public. We were located on the southern portion of the campground, which was about a 10-minute walk to the closed-off area. Something else to mention was I had my 3-year-old Labrador, Nebby. Let me just say that she was the greatest dog I ever had. She pretty much stood by my side anywhere I went, and she would always chase anybody off if they were causing me issues. Oh yeah, before I forget to mention, the southern part of the beach ends at a channel. There is a bridge that crosses over it, and it goes to the main road. This is where my family and I went in the morning in order to walk our dog, as well as play. Okay, now that I started you off with all the background context you need, let's go ahead and begin with what actually took place. My mother and I were camping on one end of the beach, and my friends had joined in as well. They were camping a little under 100 yards away south of our location. For most of the day, I had chosen to go spend time with them, seeing as my mom had chosen just to relax and do nothing. At around 6 p.m., I went back to my family's campsite, and we got dinner started. Fast forward to around 8 p.m., and my dog started to whine. At first, she did it for a couple of seconds, and I ended up ignoring it. Eventually, it got to the point she wouldn't stop. I figured she probably wanted to go for a walk or something, so I tell my mom, "Hey mom, I'm gonna take Nebby for a walk. I'll be back in a bit." "Okay honey, just don't go too far and don't take too long, okay?" So I grab her leash and we head out. Now, yes, it was pretty dark, but I told myself there was nothing to fear. This area is relatively safe, and I hadn't seen any suspicious activity throughout the whole afternoon. So, with my cell phone, my dog and I head toward the southern end of the campground, the one that was more abandoned. Luckily, I was soon joined with the sounds of kids' laughter and talking, as I could see them playing and riding around on bicycles. As we started to reach that construction area, my dog started to act funny. She was impatient, and she kept trying to get me to turn back. This should have been my sign that somebody was stalking us, but I didn't think of that. We now take a nearby staircase, and we decide to head down to the shoreline. About halfway down, I started to notice a few things. For starters, the tide hadn't gone out completely. Something else to note was how dark it was, and lastly, there is the idea that nobody is there. Deciding against it, we now plan on taking that bridge I mentioned a little bit earlier. We would use this to take us to the main road, then head back to our campsite where my mom was located. So we commence walking, when once again, my dog starts acting up, but I'm confused as to why she's doing this. But finally, I get my answer. There, ahead of me, are 2 men in hoodies seemingly just staring back at me from behind the cliffside. I started to get the goosebumps as I was considering I'm out here alone. No problem though. I could just run away and that would be it. But there was only one issue. As I was trying to get Nebby to move, she wouldn't. She was literally frozen there, with all of her hair up, ready to pounce on these two. Great. I didn't want to just leave her here by herself, not that I was planning to. Shouting out for help was definitely out of the question too, with us being at least 100 feet below the cliff and the sounds of waves crashing against rocks. There was no way anybody was going to come after us and come to our rescue. Luckily, I think Nebby was starting to get the idea because I finally started to get her to follow me. We book it, heading back up the staircase in record time, and that's when I'm expecting to see these two creeps coming up the stairs. The only thing I saw, though, were two flashlights shining around on the bottom, and then those lights are heading back the way they had come. I'm pretty sure it was the two I had seen. Now, deciding to go and hide, I run over to a bathroom where I called my mom. My mother shows up about 5 minutes later. Where have you been, honey? I've been worried sick about you. Don't tell me the two of you went down to the beach. Yeah, we did. Sorry, I should have told you something. With all of this, we go ahead and notify the park rangers, who showed up about 20 minutes later. I make sure to give them as many details as possible, and we try to forget about everything. And that should have been how the story ended, just running into two suspicious people and getting away from them. However, what we found out after is what really scared us. About 5 days later, we got a phone call from that same park ranger station. What they tell us was that two people had gone missing while at that same campground. Almost immediately, we phoned the police and I tell them about my experience. Sadly, we never did find out what happened to those two, but one thing's for certain. I know it had to do with those two suspicious men I encountered. Had Nebby not been there with me that night, my face probably would have shown up in the newspaper as missing, and that idea gives me the chills. Story number 4. We finally found out who broke into our home. Hey guys, it's the Creepy Fox. So before I start reading this story, I just wanted to go ahead and note that this is an update to a story that was sent in a couple of months ago. It was the one about the Christmas time intruder. Anyways, let's start with the submission. So, this just took place a couple of nights ago, but before I get started with that, I'll give you a basic rundown on everything that's happened so far. Let me take you back to December of 2018, specifically Christmas Eve. It was myself along with my sister, and we had been home alone. What was supposed to be a normal night of relaxation and doing nothing turned into our worst nightmare when someone had broken into our home. Luckily for us, we have CCTV security cameras set up for situations like this. When I went to go check the footage, we saw that the intruder was wearing a really creepy mask and had all dark clothing. That in itself was scary, but it's what happened a week later that really had me on my toes. That same person, the one who broke in, ended up texting me. Yeah, I know what you're thinking. I wasn't sure how this person had my number, as the only people who had it were my family and a couple of friends, all mind you, who told me it wasn't them. Anyways, the person tried to break in again, but they got away when I called police. A couple of weeks went by and it's the same thing. They get caught on CCTV breaking into the home. They never did steal anything, which was really weird. Okay, now that you're more or less caught up with everything, let's get into what happened the other night. It was myself, my sister, and some of my friends at home on our own. My friends actually showed up about an hour after my mom left for work. So fast forward a couple of hours later, and we're watching basketball. Out of nowhere, I hear my phone start to ring, and I go to check the screen. It's from an unknown caller. Curious, I go and answer it, and the conversation more or less went something like this. Hello? Who is this?
Hey there, do you remember me?
At this point, I'd put the phone on speaker so everybody in the room could hear it. My friend Danny yells back at this guy, and he's saying that if he tries to break in or show up, he'll be sorry.
Oh, you think you're tough? Just wait. I'm gonna break into that home of yours when you least expect it. And this time, I'm not just gonna go to say hello.
Danny dares this creep to try and show up to our house, which I know is the worst thing we could have possibly done. We don't know if this guy was armed, and if he was, surely that was the end of us. The call ends, and Danny, my friend, is so angry, and so is my other friend, Zach. What we do next is we grab a couple of baseball bats, turn off all the lights, and we wait in the dark. If you're wondering why we turned off all the lights, it's because we were hoping this guy thought nobody was home. So, an hour goes by, and there's no sign of this creep. Perhaps it was just a bluff. Almost an hour after, we started to hear the doorknob at the front door move. I know this wasn't my mom as she was still at work. Eventually, the door opens and we jump out from the couch and we tackled the person down. Needless to say, we knocked some sense into him. Finally, we take the mask off and the identity of this person is finally revealed. It turned out to be a classmate of mine. At this point, we held him down long enough to call the police. Eventually, they arrived and they handcuffed him and they took him away. We later learned that he had been arrested in the past because he had broken into other homes after stalking students. Turns out that just like our scenario, he had broken into others' homes and then stalked them. So, that's it. That's the story of how I was being stalked for weeks by some creepy classmate. I'm just glad we got our revenge on him and now he's serving time. Story number 5. The Night I Could Have Vanished. It was the summer of 2004, and the time was 11 p.m. I had just finished watching a Spider-Man 2 with some of my friends, and I was now heading home. The movie theater was about a 30-minute walk from my house, and it was something I didn't mind doing. Looking back, I just wish I would have taken my friend's offer to drive me home. The only reason I didn't was because I didn't want to be a nuisance. So one thing to explain about the small town I lived in is that it's relatively safe. Growing up out in the farmlands of Nebraska, I was used to quiet nights and empty streets. Even so, I always made sure to have pepper spray on me just in case, something I truly believe saved me. Okay, so I'm walking home and I decided to head down this back road that goes through some farms. It sort of acts as a shortcut, making my trip that much quicker. All was quiet. That's until I started to get the feeling like I was being followed. Now, I'm not sure if it was just me, but do you ever get that feeling? It's like a sixth sense is warning you about possible danger. I guess it didn't help that I began to hear noises through the field, but all of the plants were blocking any potential view. I started to now quicken my pace, but then the noises had stopped. I figured perhaps some farm animals might have been roaming around, and I left it at that. Fast forward about 5 minutes, and I reach a windmill. There is a crossroads at this windmill, and it has me turn one way to head home. I start going this way, and out from the fields steps somebody with a hoodie. Just imagine it, out in the middle of the night in the countryside, where no one can hear you, and this possible lunatic steps out. I froze when this happened, but I did my best to act cool. If this guy did have bad intentions, I remembered I had pepper spray. But just so I didn't jump to conclusions, I said hello to him and I wished him a good night. Hey there, stranger. Nice evening for a walk, am I right?
Yeah, it sure is. What's somebody like you doing out here all by yourself?
Oh, I was just getting some exercise. I'm meeting up with my dad and his friends. They're all in the Marines and, well, I wouldn't want them getting angry if I took too long. I said this in the hopes that he might get discouraged to act had he really had something planned. We both laugh and he wishes me a good night.
Well, I won't keep your family waiting. Go right ahead. I'm just getting some fresh air myself.
Honestly, I think he was waiting for me to let my guard down because he really acted innocent. I pass him, and soon I realized I'd made a mistake. I had my back turned to him. After 20 seconds of me passing him, I began to hear footsteps following me. Sure enough, it's the same dude.
Sorry, miss, but you dropped your wallet. Here, I thought I would go ahead and return it to you.
I fell for it. In that moment, I'd forgotten I actually just had cash with me, and actually, I stopped. As soon as he's a few feet away from me, he reveals a knife.
Well. I'm sure nobody's going to hear you out here. Not that I plan to let them.
Time seemed to have frozen in those seconds, and I almost forgot about my pepper spray. Luckily, I snap out of it, and quickly, I take it out of my pocket. Man, what a satisfaction with connecting. It was amazing. He drops and starts yelling out, while I start to book it. When I reached the end of the field, I was able to see an old-looking minivan with darkened-out windows. I assumed this belonged to this creep, and he had planned to take me in there. My best guess was he was out here seeing if he could take anyone, and I just so happened to be there that night. So, as soon as I got home, I told my dad and we called police. After days of searching, the man was never caught or heard from ever again. Story number 6. He wasn't from the power company. Growing up back in the early 1990s, I used to stay home alone a lot. The small town that I lived in was very trusting. People would leave their doors and windows unlocked, and kids would stay home alone. I know it's really unheard of today, but back then it was pretty normal. I think the only scary thing that happened was that a bear broke into somebody's car, but that's just because the owner left the window down and there was food inside. So I recall one evening in particular. It had been raining heavily that entire day, and both my parents were gone visiting my grandparents. They wouldn't be back until the next afternoon, but I myself had already returned from school and spent most of that Friday night watching cartoons and playing Super Mario. Luckily, my mom had bought a bunch of microwavable food, which was easy for me to make. Anyways, at around 9 p.m., the phone in the kitchen started to ring. I figured it could have been my parents, so I go ahead and answer it. Hello? Mom? Is that you?
No, this is Thomas with the power company. Are your parents home at the moment?
I knew no Thomas, and surely thought it was weird that the power company would be calling me this late. No, actually, I'm here on my own. My parents are out for the evening. Did you want me to leave a message and I could let them know you called? Little did I know the mistake I had made. I told this person I was home alone. Mind you, they sounded really normal and professional.
Okay, because we've been getting reports of power issues in your area, and we needed to go into your backyard just to check the tower.
Again, thinking this person was genuine, I said sure, not realizing my mistake.
Okay, just to confirm, could you give me your address and name so we can come out there?
I gave him the full information, and he ends by saying,
Thank you. You don't have to answer the door. Just leave your back fence door open and we'll be in and out in no time.
The phone conversation ends, and I start thinking more of it. If there were power issues, then wouldn't my lights be off? I decided to look out the front window so I could see if I saw any of the street lights on. All of them were on, and I even saw a light at the neighbor's front porch. I now started to get paranoid, but then I told myself I was making a big deal for nothing. Fast forward about 2 hours later, it's around midnight. I was so sleepy as I kept an eye on my backyard. Still, there's no sign of this Thomas guy, or even the power company. I now started to think that perhaps they would just come tomorrow morning instead. And yes, before you say anything, I know I should have called my parents, but I didn't know my grandparents' number, the number I would need since that's where they were staying. I was waiting for them to call me, and I did try to look it up in our notepad, but I had remembered they had a new number. This old number simply had a voice on the other end that said, "Hello, the number you are dialing is no longer in service." It was fine, as my parents called me at around 7 since they would be going to sleep early. Anyways, it's around 1 a.m., and I awoke to what sounded like a door screeching. This was a noise I was familiar with. Our fence door in our backyard makes a very squeaky sound anytime it's opened. Since my window overlooks this part of the backyard, I wake up from my sleepy state and I head over to the window. Sure enough, I could see a figure with what looks to be like a rusty old crowbar. I now watch as they head over to my back door, and they began trying to pry it open. I knew now this wasn't any sort of person coming to check the power. This was a home intruder. I had to act quickly, but if I wanted to call the police, I would have to head over to my parents' room, which was downstairs. I could have gone to the kitchen, but that's where this guy was trying to break in. So, some quick thinking, I grabbed my baseball bat and I started to make my way down the staircase. At any moment, I'm fearing he might find another way inside the house. Now, as my feet land at the base of the stairs, I hear what sounds like a window being opened. I run to the hallway and then I hide and take a peek. Sure enough, that guy from outside had made his way in through the kitchen window. I froze with fear as he began to make his way through the home. As quickly as I could, I head over to my parents' room and I quietly close and lock the door. I'm now on the phone with a dispatcher as I could hear his footsteps slowly going upstairs.
Hello? I need help. I'm home alone by myself and somebody broke in. Where are you right now, sweetie? We're sending officers there now. They'll be there soon. I'm in my parents' room, but I heard the person head upstairs. You have to get over here, quickly. Okay, stay on the line with me. Understand, try to put as much as you can between yourself and the intruder, okay?
Trust me, lady, there is no need to tell me twice. I was already on that. As minutes felt like hours, I could then hear footsteps heading down the stairs. I was now worried he was heading over to my parents' room. That's where I was. Please just leave me alone. Please just go away, I tell myself. No. Instead, I hear the footsteps approach the door, and the handle to my parents' room begins to move. That should have been it. Instead, I begin to hear him hitting the door as he uses that crowbar to try and take it down. There I am with my baseball bat, ready to act. But just as I'm about to wait for him to get inside, I hear sirens approaching my street. The noises stop, and I could hear him whisper and say,
"Oh, great. That kid's in here somewhere. He called the police."
I then hear the footsteps disappear as I assume he exits the home. Luckily, an officer had spotted him, and I soon hear him say, "Hey, you, get back here. It's the police." Remember, I'm still on the line with dispatch. The lady on the other end now tells me it's safe to leave the room, and I open the door for the officers, as they had already caught the intruder. Sure enough, an officer meets up with me, where I gave him all the details I remembered. I told him about the person who called earlier, saying they were with the power company. He tells me there were no reports of power outages, and they called the power company just to confirm and see if anybody was sent out. So, this guy decided to randomly call my house and try to see if somebody was home. He then waited until late at night to break in. Luckily, the money and jewelry he did take was returned back to us. So, that's the story about how somebody tricked me to believe they were someone they were not, only for me to give them all my information. Story number 7. If he wasn't my dad, who was he? I'm sorry if I'm not the best writer, but I wanted to submit my story to the Creepy Fox. Hope it makes it on a future episode. Well, just to let you know, it did make it on a future episode, so let's get into your story, shall we? So, for some background context, this was 2 years ago. I'm female and I was a senior in high school. Just your average ordinary girl. I had returned from school one afternoon and I had a little bit of a headache. I wrote it off as having to deal with so much homework and I just took some medicine. I wake up later that evening, but I'm feeling dizzy and warm. Sure enough, I had gotten sick, so I ended up staying home alone the next day. Little did I know what was supposed to be a day of relaxation was going to turn into a scary situation. My parents had left for work and I stayed in bed just sleeping. At around 1 p.m., I woke up to warm up some of the soup my mom had left in the refrigerator. I happened to look in my backyard, and that's when I see somebody in a hoodie going through my dad's shed. I thought it was my dad, so I opened the window and I called out, "Hey, Dad, is that you? Are you already home? Hey, could you go get me some Powerade? I could really use the electrolytes." I made the mistake of not waiting for the person to turn around. I just assumed it was my dad, and in my sleepy, tired state, I go grab the soup and I head upstairs. Once I was comfortable in bed, I put on some TV where reruns of SpongeBob were playing. I now took the time to call my mom.
Hey, Mom, it's me. Hey, thanks for making that soup. It was really good. By the way, I saw that Dad came home early today. I guess he was working in the shed. I told him to go get me some Powerade when he wasn't busy. Honey, what are you talking about? Your dad's at work right now. You know him. He's really busy at the office. In fact, he called me half an hour ago saying he wouldn't be getting home until late. Wait, so the person in the backyard isn't Dad? No, it's not.
I froze. Who was in my backyard? And why were they going through my dad's shed? Just as I'm about to get up and check outside the window, I hear what sounds like the screen of the kitchen window being opened. Great. Clearly, somebody was in the process of making their way into my house. I take the opportunity now to call for help. The dispatcher tells me officers should be here in no more than 5 minutes. Now, being the brave person I was, I grab my pepper spray and head down the stairs. All mind you, I forgot the idea that whoever was inside the house could have been armed. As I tiptoe towards the kitchen, I can hear what sounds like cupboards being opened. That was weird. I peek into the room, and there appears to be this man going through my food. I now go ahead and call out to him. "Excuse me, but what are you doing inside my house? Get out, now. Officers are on the way." This man suddenly turned around, and he revealed a switchblade. I assume that's how he opened the screen.
Wait, this is my house. What are you talking about? You should be the one that should get out, not me.
Seriously? Well, by the way he talked, it appeared as if he was on something since his speech pattern was off.
You can't tell me what to do. Come here.
He begins to stumble toward me, and I tell him to step away. Well, because I have the pepper spray. This doesn't seem to bother him because he continues. Now I don't feel sorry for what happens next. I spray him, and the yelling commences. I now run out the door, where one of my neighbors was working on his garden. Once I join him, officers arrive a couple of minutes later. They head inside my home, and after 3 minutes of searching, they find him hiding underneath my bed. Just as I expected, the guy was on a bunch of different substances, which explained his behavior. I'm just glad I was able to outsmart him. After this happened, we changed all the locks on the doors and we installed a security system. So, my word of advice is this. If you're going to stay home alone, make sure you have a plan for anything. You never know what could take place. Story number 8. Noises from the Attic. I guess this story is more on the unexplained side than anything, but tell me if you've ever had something similar happen to you. For some background, this was a few years ago when I was studying in Northern California. It was a 3-day weekend, and I had taken the time to go visit my parents in Southern California. Our plan that weekend was to go to Disneyland, and all in all, it was a lot of fun. I got to go on all my favorite rides, and I got to meet all my favorite characters. Sadly, the day had come where I had to drive back home. It was a 7-hour drive from Anaheim to San Jose, but it was one that I enjoyed regardless. So the trip back home goes fairly uneventfully, and that's until I get a call from my next-door neighbors. I was living in an apartment complex at the time, and he calls me to tell me,
Hey, could you maybe keep the noise down a little bit? I know you aren't one to make noise, but these past couple of days, it's been crazy with all that noise. I'm trying to get some sleep. What are you talking about? Oh, that's right. I forgot to tell you, I was visiting my family to go to Disneyland. So, that isn't you in your home? No, it's not. My roommate is out for the weekend too. I'm almost home. I'll go ahead and check things out.
I know I should have probably called for police, but I didn't want to make a big deal. Perhaps I left the TV on by accident. It's happened before. In fact, the same neighbor called me on another occasion when this happened, and sure enough, it was on. So I arrived to my home, and strangely enough, the door was unlocked. Inside, I was able to see some of my furniture moved around, as well as food wrappers on the carpet. That already had me on my toes, and just as a precaution, I now go ahead and call officers, and I have my neighbor James join me. We go ahead and scan each room, but we find nothing. But just as we're about to exit, we hear what sounds like a bump coming from the hallway. This was when I remembered the attic. Yeah, my apartment had one. We go ahead and have officers check, and sure enough, somebody was in there. They had made a bed using my blankets and pillows, and they had a bunch of my food from the kitchen. They were even in the process of eating a sandwich. Once they take him out of my apartment, I finally see his face, and quickly, I recognized him. He was this classmate that had been bothering me at work at the campus library, and I even had to call security because he was following me late at night. To think, he had broken into my home and most likely waited for me to come back. It's such a scary thought. He later admitted that he saw me put his spare key in the plant I had outside my door, and he was able to grab it and went inside. It's just nice to know that he won't be bothering me anymore. Story number 9. The Creepy Mountain Man. This happened in 2015. My wife and I decided, as a fun getaway, we would go camping in the Alaskan wilderness. We made sure to bring plenty of supplies, including food, camping gear, and even my dad's Beretta. Honestly, it was so exciting. I was so used to the typical work schedule, and it was starting to take its toll on me. So, on to the weekend in question. Our plan was to go out maybe 10 miles at most, then spend a couple of days out there. After, we would return the next morning. First day goes by fairly normally, but we ended up going out only about 4 miles. We find this really nice opening next to a cave, and it made natural shelter. So we made sure to set up our tents, and we got our campfire going and just relaxed. I forget to mention, but this was in October, so the snow was just starting to fall. Fast forward to later that evening, and it's around midnight, and my wife is asleep. I sat down, tending to the campfire, but in the distance, I was able to see what looked like flashlights. I did find it weird, as my wife and I hadn't seen anybody else during the entire day. But just as a precaution, I remained quiet and I kept a close eye on them. After 2 minutes of watching the flashlights go out, it sounds like I'm hearing whispers come closer to the campsite. Hello? Who's out there? Show yourself. No response, but my wife Abby wakes up confused. Hey, honey, what's with all the noise? Sorry, it's just that I heard something out there. Stay here, I'm gonna go and check things out. We soon hear branches being snapped as footsteps are heard making their way into the distance. I grab my Beretta and I started scanning the immediate area just as a precaution. After 5 minutes of securing the site, I figured this is what happened. Some campers had been out and they saw the campfire. They came to check it out, and that's when they saw our tents. That's when they left, realizing they didn't want to bother us. At least, that's what I was thinking. But don't worry, it was about to get even more scary. The next day, we spent time heading to a nearby mountain range where we took photos and my wife did some drawing. She's an artist and she loves making realistic photographs of scenery, so naturally, we were out there for most of the day. Thing is, when we arrived to our campsite, we noticed a couple of things. The most obvious was that our tents were completely destroyed. Also, my radio was completely smashed, which was a bummer because it was a gift. If that wasn't enough, our food was missing, and all of our personal belongings were thrown in the mud. I was angry thinking that it could have been the two we saw the other night, but then I calmed down. Chances are it could have been a wild animal, but I found this hard to believe as most of them had already begun hibernation. Well, since our camping trip was ruined, we gathered what we could and we start making the way back. There is 1 more mile to go, and we both begin to hear footsteps behind. We quickly turn around, and there are 2 large men heading toward my wife and I. One of them has a 12 gauge, and the other had a large hatchet. To give you a quick description of them, they looked like your typical mountain men, both around 6'5", over 300 pounds, with large scruffy beards, beanies, and overalls. Now, I'm not the tallest dude in the world. I'm about 6 foot, 220 pounds, and my wife is around 5'3", 115 pounds. I could defend us if I had to, but against that 12 gauge, it could have been a challenge. Still, both of them said nothing, but they kept following us. I get annoyed, so I tell them, "Hey, was there something we could help you with or something? What's the deal? Stop following us." The one with the 12 gauge loses it, and then he points it at my wife and I.
Yeah, we have a problem with you coming out to our land. We don't take kindly to those who think it's a great idea to come camping on our grounds.
I could have grabbed my Beretta, but in a situation like this, I figured I'd have to do all I could to calm him down. One wrong mistake, and it was the end of both my wife and I. "Look, buddy, we don't want any trouble. We thought this area was open to the public. We're leaving, okay?" What he does next sends chills down my spine. He fires a warning shot next to a tree, then points back to us and says,
If we ever see you out here again, then it'll be you I aim at. Understand?
My wife is crying, and I'm standing in front of her doing all I could to act brave. "Yes, of course. Sorry for the misunderstanding." Both of them then let out creepy laughs, then turn back and head into the woods. Of course, those moments of them walking away were so tense. I thought they might turn around and change their minds. I stood my ground until eventually we no longer see them. My wife and I now head back to our car, and on the windshield there is a note. I go ahead and open it, and the message simply says, "Don't ever come back here ever again if you know what's good for you." So we took that warning, and we haven't been back to that part of the wilderness ever since. Story number 10. Don't take breaks at old quiet rest stops. Back in the late 1990s, I was driving back home after spending spring break with my family. It's about a 7-hour drive through the countryside that has you go without seeing towns or people for hours at a time. I was on this long stretch of highway, and I suddenly got the urge to use the restroom. Sadly, the nearest rest stop wasn't for another 20 miles, so I had to speed up. Eventually, I can see the exit, and I waste little time taking care of my business. Here's the thing. When I had gotten to that rest stop, it was around 1 a.m., and there were no other vehicles. As I'm washing my hands, however, I hear the sound of a car pulling up on the gravel. Seconds later, I hear a car door open. But thinking nothing of it, I go to dry my hands and I step outside. Once I'm out, I'm faced with this large man I'd never seen. I want to describe him as about 6'4", 270 pounds with dirty old clothing and a ski mask. "Excuse me, sir. I'm just trying to get to my car."
Wait, hold on a minute. Where are you going? By the way, what's your name? I just wanted to know something, that's it.
"It's Emily. Now, what did you want?"
Hey there, Emily. Are you out here all by yourself?
I didn't answer this question, as the creepy tone he gave me let me onto the idea he was up to no good.
I said, are you out here alone or not? Get back here.
He now sounded flustered as I step inside my car and begin to start it. He reaches for the door and he starts trying to open it.
You're in a lot of trouble there, girl. Go ahead and open the door.
He then reaches into his jacket pocket, and I can see what looks like an M9. My dad's a police officer, and it looked exactly like the one he has. I floor it, accidentally hitting his foot. Good, he deserved it. I start to drive away, but that's when I hear loud pops making their way toward my car. Well, you can imagine my heart is racing a million miles an hour as I'm thinking just how crazy the entire situation was. However, it was about to get a whole lot worse. About 3 minutes later, I'm able to see headlights in my rearview mirror. They begin flashing on and off, so it's indicating the person wanted me to pull over. That wasn't happening. Well, during one of the moments where the lights dim, I'm able to see the vehicle more clearly. It looks exactly like the dark blue SUV from the rest stop, the same one the creepy dude had shown up in. What happens next is him chasing me for 5 minutes, trying to get me to pull over. At one point, he even bumps into the back, causing me to almost lose control. Now, remember, this is back in the 90s. There's no cell phones, and there's no way for me to call for assistance. So, my best bet was either find an exit or find another vehicle, whichever of the two came first. Luckily, I caught my break. Up ahead, I could see a highway patrol officer on this side of the road. I went ahead and went over 100, which caught his attention. This caused Mr. SUV man to slow down, and eventually he turned back. When the officer stopped me, I explained everything that had taken place. Naturally, he didn't believe me at first, but that's until he saw all the damage that he had done to my car. Eventually, more officers are called, and we go to the nearby station where I filed a report. I never did hear back from them, and I'm not sure what happened to the SUV dude. My question is this: has anybody else ever had a similar experience? If so, please let me know. I'll be checking the comments section, so thanks. Story number 11. The Masked Man at the Lake. This took place around Thanksgiving of 2005 in northern Michigan. I had recently moved into a new home with my wife, and we were located near a series of large lakes. Since we're new to the area, we decided to introduce ourselves to the neighbors. They were an elderly couple who were really sweet. They made us a wonderful Thanksgiving dinner, and we spent the whole night watching movies and having fun. As we started to get to know them better, the husband, who we will call Arthur, told us about this section of the lake that was private property. He told me he knew the owner and told them we could go fishing there sometime. See, I told Arthur that fishing was one of my pastimes. Anyways, the owner, who we will call John, agrees, and one day, my wife and I went over to his home. He was going on a road trip with his family, but he told us we were more than welcome to go fishing. Sweet. So, my wife and I spent that majority of that afternoon fishing and having a barbecue. At around 4:30 p.m., it's getting dark, and we're just getting ready to make the 20-minute drive back home. However, out of nowhere, somebody with a ski mask and a hatchet stumbles out from behind some trees. This caught the attention of both my wife and I, and the more I thought about it, the more I began to think that John had come back to play a joke on us. Very funny, John. You really scared us. Hey, I thought you and your wife were going on a road trip. Did something happen? This person stands there confused, but then start making their way towards us while swinging the hatchet in the air. Come on, John, that's not funny. Be careful with that thing. He then says one line that has my wife and I lose it.
I'm not John.
He was right. His voice sounded completely different. My wife and I are now in the car as we floor it heading back to our home. We ended up going to Arthur's house, and we explained the mysterious person we had encountered. He, of course, had no idea who it could have been. So, we ended up calling the police just as a precaution. They searched the area, and they noticed that John's home had been broken into. There was a broken window, and there were even some valuables that had been taken. Sadly, the person was never found, but we are pretty sure it had to be the guy we had seen. Before we get to the last story, I just want to say thank you once again for making it this far in the video. Remember, if you'd like to see more, including previews and exclusive content, then make sure to be following me over on my Instagram, @TheCreepyFoxOfficial. Thanks. On to the last story. Now on to our final story. Story number 12. Nighttime Stranger in the Treehouse. Before I begin, I'll let you know that I was 18 and I lived in a small rural area outside of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. One night in the fall of 2007, I was outside in the backyard with my cousin Lacey. Now, my backyard is essentially a huge field with a set of woods right behind it. Oftentimes, we would spend time at the treehouse my dad had built us. This evening, we had been listening to music and we were watching movies on my laptop. I forget what we were watching, but I think it was Toy Story or something. Either way, we began to hear footsteps below us stumbling around through the fallen leaves. We thought it might have been my dad telling us dinner was ready, so I peek out the window and I say, "I know, Dad. We'll be out there in a few minutes. Just let us put the laptop away, okay?" The footsteps suddenly stopped. Now, mind you, I never actually saw anyone. I just assumed it was my dad. Okay. Now I should probably explain this part. Even though we're near our house, it's sometimes possible there could be a bear roaming around. It's very uncommon, but we have seen them in our backyard. Because of this, I had my dad's .22 just in case. Well, what happens next is the sound of the footsteps getting closer to our treehouse. We then begin to feel the vibration of somebody climbing the ladder. Okay, Dad, I know. I can understand the food's getting cold. We're coming down. What happens next was crazy. When we're going to the ladder, we see somebody peek over. Yup, just like you imagined. It wasn't my dad. Instead, it was a stranger with a hoodie. He's still a couple of steps from entering, but when he puts one of his hands up on the floor of the treehouse, we see what looks like a sharp blade. We knew now this person was up to no good. Without a moment's waste, I grabbed the .22, but not before the guy completely changes his mind once he sees it, and he starts climbing down. He then wastes no time running off into the woods. Once the coast was clear, Lacey and I make the minute run to the house, where we tell my mom and dad about the stranger. We ended up calling police, but nothing ever came up. Only thing they found were tire tracks located about half a mile from the treehouse. Not sure who he was and what he had planned, but I'm just glad we weren't out there without some help.